right, it's Friday, which means it's time for another roundtable extravaganza. And joining me are two Rubin Report veterans. One, a professor of health policy at Stanford School of Medicine, Dr. J. Bhattacharya, and the other, an addiction medicine specialist and host of Ask Dr. Drew, Dr. Drew Pinsky. Doctors, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you as always.
Thanks.
I feel that for a moment I should put on my glasses too, otherwise I really look like the dumbest of the three of us, which is true, but people shouldn't know that just by the glasses, right? That's like the key to the whole operation.
I'll take mine off and see. No, that's not going to work.
Okay, we're going to just dive into a couple interesting things happening this week. Not purely political, just a little bit of the cultural stuff and some COVID stuff and some science stuff and some Ozempic stuff, which I don't know that we've talked about Ozempic on the show before, but I thought you guys would be perfect for what I wanted to dive into today. So first, I just want to show you, we're going to show you two videos here. I think I'm not sure if there's audio on them, so we can talk over them, but these are Biden at the G7 yesterday, and something is going on with this guy, and I'm going to try to do this without being glib since I have two serious guests on the show, and just take a look at this. And then this is the one, really. Watch this. Just starts wandering off. Look at them all. Try to Macron. Look at who's going to get him. Who's going to get him? Maloney, she's in charge. It's her country. And look at him. And now the slow motion. Something is clearly not right here. We all can see it. It seemingly is getting worse. What should we all feel about this beyond the moments of sort of glibness and humor and everything else? Drew, you first.
Well, it's sad, right? Let's feel bad for him as a human being. I practice straight internal medicine now, and most of what I do, in fact, is geriatrics. And so when I look at, again, I don't know him, I'm not his doctor, but there are certain things that as physicians, we can sort of observe and describe, like a rash or a certain behavior, or in this case, what you described, Dave, as the slow motion. He has motoric slowing. He has rigidity. He has what's called a mask-like facies. The other day we saw him standing with this wild, stuck smile on his face while everybody else was dancing. So when you add up the motoric slowing, the rigidity, the mask-like facies, those are called, well, I'm describing what we see. Jay, what are those called? They're features of?
Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's, exactly. Or we call them Parkinsonian features. And in elderly patients, Parkinsonian features develop in a variety of neurological conditions, even just aging itself. It doesn't mean you have Parkinson's disease per se, but it is part of a common neurological decline associated with aging. Now, the other thing we saw was he seemed sort of disorganized and overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. That is also a very common thing with aging, where people feel like they can't process what's coming in. And take a man that age with those constellation of symptoms, throw them in an airplane, new time zones, multiple stimulations, overwhelmed, can't handle it. So this could all just be the effect of an aging brain. It could be something progressive. It could be Parkinson's disease. That's also associated with cognitive problems like we're seeing. But what's interesting is if you remember when he was cleared by his doctor, they went, oh, his doctor says he's fine. And so does his neurologist. And nobody went, hey, why does he have a neurologist? Why did he need a neurologist? So clearly somebody is treating these conditions we're seeing. Now add anti-Parkinsonian medication in, and that can cause all kinds of cognitive problems. Jay, do you disagree with anything I said? I'm so glad there's another physician here.
I don't disagree with it. I have to say, Drew, it makes me uncomfortable, but for a couple of reasons. One is I'm a research doctor, not a practicing physician, so I shouldn't like weigh in on that. And I also feel uncomfortable when doctors diagnose other people.
We're not diagnosing it. We're describing.
That's what I'm saying. You are not doing that. What you're doing is you're describing what you're seeing. And as a citizen, I want to know what my leaders, what they're facing. I mean, they're human. We're voting for humans, right? Their leaders are human, and it could be forgivable. But if there's real things that I should worry about, they should be honest about that. Like trying to hide it and pretend like it doesn't exist when people can see that it kind of does, is really distressing. And then the question is like, are the decisions that are getting made all made by him? Are they really? Right. Is he really in charge? There's a lot of like questions I think any citizen legitimately could ask, and it doesn't matter what party you're in.
Doesn't it feel to
by
you?
the way,
oh, go ahead.
Dave, I'm just going to say, I worry more about, people are very worried about what they're seeing and the slowing and all this stuff. But listen, if he is taking medication, because sometimes he moves around a little better, and that's usually medication. And those medicines cause very strange cognitive changes. So I almost worry about that more than some of the things that people are worrying about in their common discourse about what's going on with Joe Biden.
Right. And Drew, you sort of hit this, but we're all sort of sympathetic to someone of a certain age with all the time zones and flying and pressure and everything else. Even if he was cognitively 100%, and again, we're not diagnosing him, you'd still accept some level of, we've all had jet lag. You fly to Europe.
I don't know about you guys. I've always wondered how they do that. So I've gotten older. I really wonder how they do it. But if I were advanced age with neurological symptomatology, it's like, oh man, that's brutal.
Well, then let me ask you guys one other thing on this, not on the medical side, but purely on the political side. It strikes me that it's fairly obvious, let's say that he's probably on medication or that there's a small group of people that know what's really going on here. This seems not to be hyperbolic, like it could be the biggest political scandal in 50 years or something like that since Watergate, if that actually is the case. Does that sound totally off the reservation to you, Jay?
No, I don't. I think that okay, so like you can go back in American history and look at FDR, right? So the press and the White House hid his disability from the American public, and if suppose that the American public had known, would they have like undermined? I mean, the guy obviously was cognitively still all there. Like he was making decisions sharply till the end of his life. The difference here, there was also like, I think you can go back and look at the Ronald Reagan, right, toward the end of his time as president. There were like allegations of this, and there was some question, but this strikes me as like qualitatively much worse than either of those two. Right, the FDR wasn't cognitively. There was no question about his cognitive capacity. Ronald Reagan, by the end, you could start to say it slowed, but I didn't. Like, I was young then, so maybe I wasn't seeing it, but I didn't see anything close to this. Here, what we have is in real time. If you have elderly parents or grandparents, and you've seen this, you don't really need to be a doctor to say, look, something's not right.
Well, Jay, right before we started, Drew, I mentioned to Jay that I spent a lot of time with my grandmother who had dementia in her later years, and I was taking her to geriatric doctors and to the cognitive people and all that. And so much of what I see in him is the same thing, the rigidity in the hands, you mentioned something about that, but also the emotional dysregulation, which you see with Biden in a lot of these speeches, where it sounds sort of monotone and then he starts screaming out of nowhere. So there's just a whole bunch of pieces here.
You listen, and Jay mentioned two historical antecedents, but there's one more egregious one, which was Woodrow Wilson, who was in bed, brain dead with a stroke, massive stroke, and his wife ran the government for 3 months. So what was our takeaway from that? Did we learn anything from that experience as a country? Or we just went, oh, well, moving along, move on. I don't know. It seems like we've been challenged by this. And there's an interesting thing in what Jay was just sort of shining a light on, which is we are living a lot longer now, a lot better. And so we're going to have older people, look at our Congress, in positions of power and decision making. And look, for Jay and my profession, there are things in place to make sure we don't stay in too long for what happens to us when we're aging. There should probably be something like that in place for our government leaders too, given the reality of people living so long these days, and reasonably so. And as Jay said, it's human beings in these positions, no one else.
And by the way, although it's not about age specifically, as you both mentioned, Reagan was younger than Biden when he left office. And there is another guy running right now who's not that young. That's, of course, Donald Trump. And I thought it would be interesting to juxtapose Biden, what we just showed you at G7, versus what Trump was up to this week.
We'd like to extend the invite to Joe Biden if he'd like to come on this podcast.
Yeah, I think eventually. You should. You know what chance you have of getting him on? I'd say less than 1%. Okay? If you did that, I'd actually watch that one. See you guys.
Oh, no way. We got gifts.
Oh, no. They sold for a lot of money this thing.
Oh, no way. Thank you, President.
Here you go. She split it up. Here's
amazing.
Sure. This is
Is this your mugshot?
Yeah, can you move
No way. You're a gangster.
This is what we're reduced to.
No way.
Should we put them on now?
Yeah. Isn't it crazy though?
That's amazing.
And it sells. Well, Elvis had one, Frank Sinatra had one.
This shirt?
But we've eclipsed them. A long time ago, we've eclipsed them.
And where down we...
Yo, I'm scared.
He does not disappoint.
Well,
I don't know. Stop.
I don't know exactly where you guys are on Trump and support, and that's actually largely irrelevant. The reason I thought that was interesting is if you just look at his ability to joke and be irreverent and silly and not disappoint, and the energy and all of that.
The movement, just moving fluidly. Look at how people move their arms when they don't have neurological impairment. That's all.
Jay, I mean, it's just so stark that people are going to vote on that, if nothing else.
I mean, he is definitely a great entertainer, and you can see that. And Drew, I completely agree with you. He is cognitively just what, I don't know if you want to say all there, depending on your opinion of all there for Trump, but I'll say this is like there's no deficit at all.
Right.
Like you're not worried that you may be worried about what his policies are or whatever, but you're not worried at all about his capacity to say and think what he believes, and so that's just a very striking difference, the physical movement difference.
Again, you're shining lights on little interesting things here, and isn't that what leadership is? It's speaking, having their thoughts and their decision making and their point of view. That's what we want. That's what we want from a leader. But Dave, why can't you get him on your podcast? I'm a little disappointed.
We've had Trump on once, and I don't want to say too much, but
okay, good.
There's been a little contact recently. Stay tuned on that. Let me just mention one other thing on the media side, because you guys remember a couple of years ago when Donald Trump on a rainy day walked down those stairs. No, not stairs. He walked down a ramp slowly, and everyone was on CNN, 25th Amendment, we got to get rid of him, versus how the media covers Joe Biden. That, I think we can connect to a lot of things that you guys do specialize in on the COVID side and misinformation and all that. That, to me, is the craziest part of this, that the media is pretending that we all don't see a thing that we all very obviously see, Drew.
I wish this was the only thing. As you said, in the COVID side, it was the same thing. I wish this was the only thing that they were obfuscating and distorting around. But you know what? They're doing us a favor, because people are running away screaming from their viewership, and they're not listening, and they're going to sources like you and other sources to try to get their news, because they realize that what is coming out of mainstream media is just an abomination. And it's not a secret. And people that stay with it for unclear reasons, sort of to get their point of view massaged maybe. But I'm so glad we're with Jay today, by the way. You mentioned the COVID misinformation, all that nonsense. For me, Jay Bhattacharya, I've told him this before, and I'm going to say it again, is the poster child for the excesses of COVID. That's the man. This is the man they chose to silence. And what were Fauci's word to swiftly
devastating takedown.
Devastating takedown. Jay Bhattacharya needs a devastating takedown. And I'm really mad at the congressional leadership for not bringing in all those emails into the hearing on Dr. Fauci, because that, to me, it's a smoking gun of the excessive were right there.
Well, we're going to get to some COVID stuff in a sec, but actually, Jay, why don't you pick it up there, and then that'll give us a nice segue.
Drew, I appreciate the kind words, and the devastating takedown is insane. But actually, let me just push back just slightly on the media. Although I do share your hopeful take, there is some aspect of it. It's just, if you have a political leader that the media like, they don't, the media actually is really important to hold political leaders, especially our presidents, to account. If they are allowed to, do whatever nonsense they want without being held to account by the media, it's very difficult to get the American public to pay attention to it. A lot of the nonsense during COVID happened because, especially after Biden got into office, with the vaccine mandates and all that, a normal media, if he'd had a president they didn't like, they would have questioned a lot of the things that they did. Instead, they were like a Praetorian Guard for Biden. with the censorship, with all kinds of things that normally I think Americans would just look and say, "Are you kidding me?" And I think it's very dangerous that the media has taken sides in this way. It would be much better for the republic if the media were a reasonable constraint on the behavior of democratic presidents, and they're not.
And by the way, that the best argument for what you just said there would be that Donald Trump, for whatever his flaws were during COVID and whatever anyone might think about warp speed and everything else, he never mandated the vax. But had he mandated the vax, the very same media that was telling you that you had to get vaccinated would have said that it would have killed you. You're both nodding in agreement on that. So why don't we move this to the next COVID topic? Because this is absolutely wild. Dr. Mike Yeadon, who is one of the former vice presidents of Pfizer, is now saying that the COVID vaccines were actually designed to reduce fertility. Take a look at this.
If you followed me, you'll know I, over 30 years, in research in the pharmaceutical industry and biotech. I trained in toxicology and I worked with colleagues designing experimental molecules that we hoped would become medicines. That gives me the credentials to stand, as it were, in the shoes of the designers of these vaccines and answer the question, what were you thinking when you made these design decisions? Now you can go and watch any of my interviews, but I'll cut to the chase. And you may not believe it, but I am sure, not slightly but sure, these materials were designed intentionally to harm, maim, and kill, and to reduce human fertility. That is my verdict. And I can stand it up. I will be in court, Supreme Court in Costa Rica very shortly, and I'll be using exactly this argument, but I will give the detail. That's the first point. So don't take these injectables. Don't take the next lot either. They will also be designed to harm you. All mRNA-based materials are dangerous. Don't take them.
All right, that is a former VP at Pfizer. Obviously, I can't speak to the claim there specifically. Jay, this is a little more your department. I mean, we've heard all sorts of stuff about mRNA technology now, even from Robert Malone, who owns more patents on it than anyone else. I mean, what do you make of this stuff at this point?
Okay, so first, I don't think he's right. I don't think that specifically in one point, I don't like in my experience with drug developers and others, I don't see that any of them would intentionally design a molecule in order to create infertility. And you know, that just doesn't ring true with me. I don't see anything in the sort of the makeup of the vaccine that just from this molecular sequence or whatever that screams out this is going to cause infertility. None of that particular thing doesn't make sense. Now,
okay.
But it may, like the question of does it cause infertility, right? Does it cause birth defects? Those are empirical questions that are actually often answered after you've rolled the vaccine out, because the randomized trials don't have pregnant women in them. They generally don't ask that kind of question. They don't have the sample sizes to address it.
So those are not enough time, right? I mean, there's just simply not enough time.
So that's why I think he's being hyperbolic in ways that I don't agree with. I do agree with one part of this, and maybe there's some of the spirit of it, in the sense that I think that the regulatory agencies have been very, very slow to look at these kinds of side effects from this vaccine. And they were motivated in large part because they thought that if people thought that there were these kinds of side effects, or if they actually identified these kind of side effects, no one would take the vaccine. I don't understand why that would be a bad thing. Like if one were to find that there was fertility defects caused by the vaccine, then you should not be recommending it to pregnant women, to women that are trying to get pregnant, or just generally to younger people. It would make no sense to do that, right? So that would not be a bad outcome. And yet the regulatory agencies, because they were afraid that it would cause vaccine hesitancy, I believe that's the motivation, did not act as rapidly as they should have and as rigorously as they should have to identify the side effect profiles of this vaccine like they would normally for other drugs and products.
Drew, can we stick with the intent part for a minute? Because Jay, I totally hear you. We have no way of knowing the intent, but I think what a lot of people are probably thinking while they're watching this is the intent is actually irrelevant at this point. These people, they didn't maybe intend to lie about 6 feet social distancing, but they did. They didn't intend to lie about masks, but they did. So in a weird way, I fully understand the argument, but I don't think it even matters to some extent. Does that make sense, Drew?
It makes sense in that exactly what Jay is saying. It's that the intent part doesn't ring true, but if it does so as a matter of fact, well, you can look back at design and say, well, they should have at least known this was going to do that as part of the design. And so I kind of get that. But Dr. Yeadon's been around hyperbolic with a lot of ideas for a little while here. This isn't the first one. But I'll tell you, there are 3 things that I would like answered. And by the way, keep your eye on Joseph Fryman. Have you interviewed him yet?
No, I haven't.
He really is very careful in his criticism, and they're quite accurate. John Campbell recently highlighted his stuff, and it was really quite good. But there are 3 things that I'm concerned with. One is, it's becoming increasingly evident the spike protein is the pathogenic piece of the virus. Why are we pushing so hard on a vaccine? I understand why you created the vaccine to begin with, but once it becomes increasingly clear that the spike protein itself is pathogenic, why are we pushing so hard on that particular form of vaccine when there are whole viral vaccines out there that don't have so much spike protein, number one. Number 2, why do we continue to push on vaccinating young males where we know they're at no risk from Omicron and some real risk of myocarditis? And then finally, the third question is, okay, now we're actually admitting there are excess deaths, something you couldn't admit 5 minutes ago, but we could all see it. The question is that COVID? Is it COVID plus vaccine? Is it vaccine? What are the components of each? And why can't we ask those questions? So these are infuriating things.
Let me connect this to something else, because there was a lawsuit involving Johnson & Johnson. And of course, Johnson & Johnson, they were the ones that put out the non-mRNA vaccine. And then it sort of got pushed out of the way once mRNA became the thing. But they are now in they just had a massive settlement on baby powder, of all things. Check this out from Reuters. Johnson & Johnson has agreed to pay $700 million to settle an investigation by 42 U.S. states and Washington, D.C., into its marketing of baby powder and other talc-based products blamed for allegedly causing cancer. The settlement resolves charges that Johnson & Johnson misled consumers into believing that its talc products, which sold for more than a century before stopping, were safe. Reuters, that's it. So they've settled for $700 million here. I mean, in light of everything that has happened over the last couple of years, I'm pretty sure everyone watching this has Johnson & Johnson baby powder in their house, whether you've got a baby there or not. It's just the stuff that you use for all sorts of stuff. Post-haircut, you might use it. Jay, I mean, is this just another thing? Like every year we're just going to wake up and go, boy, everything that we trusted, every organization, every product, it all was faulty.
Well, part of the problem is that for something like that, it's hard to know, right? Because it's so pervasive. There isn't a controlled study. It's like it's just a very difficult question to answer. There are very likely things in our environment that we use that are harmful that we don't know about. We learn ex post that they're harmful. The issue then is like, what do we do about that? Life expectancy were going up before the pandemic, regardless of all of these environmental exposures. So I don't think, again, you need to panic about these kinds of things. But at the same time, you shouldn't automatically dismiss them out of hand, and especially like the government, the public health authorities should not be gaslighting people that think they're injured around this. Again, I would just bring it back to the vaccine, like the experience with the COVID vaccine. There were legitimately COVID vaccine injured people that wanted to talk to each other, get some kind of compensation from the government, at least some get acknowledgement that they were harmed. And the government went out of its way to tell them that they weren't actually COVID vaccine injured, to suppress their Facebook groups so they couldn't speak with each other, and to tell people that there was that the vaccine was entirely safe when they had no way of knowing that it was entirely safe, even after the randomized trial was done. Drew, you mentioned Joe Fryman, who's a fantastic scientist. He reanalyzed the COVID vaccine trials for the mRNA to look to see what the rate of adverse events were. He found a 1 in 800 measure of serious adverse events in the randomized trial.
Yep.
that doesn't mean no one should take the vaccine. What it does mean is that you want to be very careful about who you recommend it to. Older people, the balance of benefits and harms may make sense to recommend it.
Wait, Jay, can you explain that? That is way higher. Now, I'm sorry, for a moment I couldn't remember who he was. I was actually at the panel that you were at that DeSantis put together, Jay, here in Florida, and Jay Fryman was there and mentioned that. The 1 in 800 is way, way higher than a normal vaccine, right, for injuries.
Oh, ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things where like, okay, you're in the middle it's December 2020. Everyone's scared to death about COVID. You have this product that all of a sudden has promises to reduce the symptomatic infection rate by 95% for a couple of months. The question is, how do you use it? 1-800 is a big number. Now, serious adverse events doesn't mean necessarily killing you. That, in fact, it doesn't. What it means is like, severe reactions. Rarely it'll get you in the hospital, but it's not something you want to ignore, right? But it's much higher, as Drew said, than most vaccines that are on the market. So the question is, how do you use that thing? How do you use that product? The reasonable way to use it is say, look, let's look at the high-risk people for whom this product the benefits might outweigh the harms, and recommend it for them carefully. Making sure it's not like, too aggressively and with informed consent. And for younger people for whom the benefit almost certainly does not outweigh the harms, don't recommend it and certainly don't mandate it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. But I would, to follow on what you're asking, I look no further than your food sources to look for things that have been covered by lobby groups and scientists and various kinds of campaigns to manipulate you into yummy foods that are not good for you. So it's all over the place. But the courts are not the harbinger of truth. They're not there to determine the truth or falsity of a claim. And so this talc causes cancer is still questionable. It's just that they made a calculus that they should settle as opposed to try to see this through. And there might be something there, but it reminds me of many, many claims that have been taken against companies where massive liability has been alleged or determined by the court that have really very little to do with the truth.
Right. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the hard part is like there are situations in medical history, recent medical history, where there were bad actors. Like I think Vioxx, Merck hid the evidence that Vioxx, which is this painkiller drug that they were selling at scale, causes strokes and heart attacks
at a much lower rate than the vaccine is causing harm, a much lower rate. And by the way, I used Vioxx back in the day. It was an excellent drug. And I would argue might have, certainly given the risk reward we took with the vaccine, would definitely fit into that the calculus. But it would, for me, they took it off the market. I have patients that suffer to this day because they took that drug off the market. So that tiny risk, they took the drug off the market and took the company to task.
Drew, it's funny because like I remember recommending my mom take it at one point, like in like late 90s or early 2000s. And then when the thing came on the news that it was like causing heart attacks, she's like, why are you trying to kill me, Jay? It's like,
You didn't have her change her will right before that, did you?
No.
All right, let's connect this to a drug that is absolutely on the market right now, which I suspect will not be on the market forever, which is Ozempic. Of course, this is the weight loss drug that basically every celebrity is on right now. Jillian Michaels went on Sage Steele's podcast and talked a bit about that.
You will plateau on this drug. Not an opinion. Fact. Fact. Google that. I'm encouraging to Google. Don't trust me. Google it for yourself. You will plateau on the drug. Your body is homeostatic, which means over time it's seeking a balance. GLP-1 is a hormone, incretin, it's a hormone. So when you are giving the body a hormone exogenously, over time, the body is like, oh, I'm going to stop making this on my own. Oh, I'm going to develop a tolerance to this.
Tolerance, yep.
And you will plateau on the drugs. Google it. Now then, what are you going to do when they stop working physiologically? Do you think you're going to get off of it? Because you will gain all of the weight back. All of the meta-analyses show us this. Google it. It's not my opinion, okay? So here's the bigger problem. Now, when the drug stops working, if you choose to get off of it, because it's also very expensive, you're handcuffed to this drug for the rest of your life, Google it. Okay. So we get off of it. You've got a couple of issues. Fact. There is, quote, let me quote Peter Attia. Hopefully he's more credible than Dr. Terry Dubrow. He will tell you that in his practice, according to the DEXA scans he does with his patients, he sees muscle loss at a, quote, alarming rate. He uses these drugs as a last resort, and he won't even put patients on them until he does a DEXA scan to make sure that they're not older and in a dangerous position where they can't afford to lose muscle mass or bone density.
Okay, so I'm not the scientist on the panel here. However, I will tell you just anecdotally, I know a couple people that either were or are on Ozempic, have had insane weight loss, and it is so obvious to me. Again, I'm not the scientist. It is so obvious to me that this cannot be good for your system because you cannot lose weight that fast. It's also changing people's facial structures. You see these before and after pictures and everything else. Drew, I'll let you go first on this one because it's being used heavily in Hollywood. That's your neck of the woods. Unless you moved to Florida this week and you didn't tell me yet.
God bless Jillian. She is 100% right in all of it. Like she says, just Google it. It's all factual. Many things to be said here. Let me just scroll through a couple of them.
Okay.
You are going to begin to hear about people who died on Ozempic and Mounjaro. I know of one case I just found out last night, a very high-profile case here in Los Angeles, was a bowel obstruction from one of these drugs. And the bowel obstruction is how people are dying. In addition to these bowel obstructions and bowel rupture, they're getting septic from and it's very rapid for some reason. In addition, I'm seeing gastroparesis, which is an inability of the stomach to move, and that's a horrible condition once it develops. And then finally, as Jillian said, sarcopenia. And sarcopenia, she mentioned Peter Attia, his whole focus on not allowing sarcopenia to happen as we age, because it is one of the highest predictors of aging poorly, longevity, and having difficulty as we age. So it's accelerating sarcopenia. It's actually killing people. She's right, it is reversible. There is no free lunch in nature. Diet and exercise. It's hard. We can use it maybe to get people going. We can use it when, again, the risk reward is worth it. Somebody's diabetic, somebody's massively obese, they've tried everything, then it's worth the risk. But Jay, I feel like we've lost the ability to make a risk reward analysis in our profession. It's the weirdest thing.
We've gone backwards on it for sure, Drew. And during I was just shocked. Like if you mentioned cost benefit analysis or benefit harm analysis, you were a fringe epidemiologist back during the COVID era. It strikes me that obesity is a particularly dangerous area for drug intervention because of the fact that it's so common. I think, what is it, like 40% of the American population or more are obese, or adult population are obese, and because people so desperately want to fix it. And so it's really easy to take advantage of people. So this drug, Ozempic, it was first used in diabetics. There were good reasons to use it in diabetics, and it kind of worked for diabetics. The expansion of it to use for the population wide is not at all surprising that we're going to see portions of the population that take it have some side effects that we didn't anticipate, and some of which we did anticipate. I'm reminded of an earlier weight loss drug, this Fen-Phen. Yep. And that same exact drug. It was very, very popular for a while until there was a major side effect identified with lung
cardiac, mitral valve deterioration.
That too. So and all of a sudden it was like, okay, this was just poison that was put on the population. It looks to me like the same kind of trajectory.
Right. So again, as the layman here, I mean, doesn't this just, to me, is just like another one where you're both exactly right. They are going to end up saying that there's all of this side effect. Nobody should be on this. But Drew, can you talk a little bit about how does this stuff go from being a niche medication for something to then what then happens in the system after that it then just gets commercialized to everybody, as Jay's talking about?
It's a great question. It's a great question. And I'm sure everyone wants to blame the drug company, but the drug company is duplicitous. They blow wind into the sail of what our profession does. What happens is beware evangelizing physicians. It happened in the opioid crisis. It happened in COVID. And it's happening with obesity treatment. When there's a group of physicians that are properly what's the credential. They're given the credential. They get kind of hold of the regulators. They get the drug company behind them, and they evangelize, and they get converts, and it becomes a problem to physicians who don't do these things. Literally, before the opioid crisis, we could be put in prison if we didn't use enough pain medication. They were putting doctors in jail and fining them millions of dollars as criminals, not as malpractice, as criminals. And that's where the opioid crisis got going. COVID, you had Deborah Birx going around evangelizing for lockdowns. Physicians should never evangelize on anything. We should always have a humble uncertainty in regard to everything we do.
I want to connect this. Go, Jay, do you have something
well,
there?
I just wanted to violently agree with Dr. Drew on that.
Violently agree. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I just like a violent agreement in favor of moderation. I mean, and humility. Like that is I don't understand how we got to this point where physicians think that they know how to solve all of the. I mean, we barely know how to care for our patients, as best I can tell.
Again, I can tell you guys as the layman, and just anecdotally, I once, many years ago, I had anxiety when I was getting on planes, and I went to a doctor to try to get something, I don't know, like Xanax or something, and he told me I had time shift disorder and tried to give me some other prescription, and I noticed that I kid you not, Drew, you'll love this one, his stapler was from Prozac. And I thought, this is absolutely insane. This is like, the stupidest drug version would be if you went to, I know neither one of you are endorsing this, but if you went to buy marijuana and the guy gave you crack, like it's just absolutely crazy. The doctors are not endorsing any of that. I'm not endorsing crack either. Let's connect this to one other thing here.
For change, Dave.
I don't know how to segue out of that. Well, anyway, here's Bill Gates and cow farts. Go.
What happens with beef, my climate group, Breakthrough Energy, just announced literally today an investment in an Australian group called Ruminate that helps cows not be so much a source of methane emissions. So we have two paths to solving that. That's 6% of global emissions are cows who burp and fart methane to an extreme degree. You can either fix the cows to stop them doing that, or you can make beef without the cow, and both of those, will be pursued to see which one can lead to the best product in terms of taste, health, and cost.
All right, so there's a bunch of stuff here. First off, you guys see me on Twitter. You know how much I enjoy steak and cooking and all that, and I've largely been doing the carnivore diet, which has been unbelievably good for me, and I've had my blood tested, and it's all good, and I'm not recommending it to anyone. But it's interesting to me that here's the man who owns the largest amount of farmland in the United States, Bill Gates, who now wants to, as he said, do something to cows so that they either don't burp or fart as much, or that we'll just get off meat altogether. Either way, I sense he's going to profit a lot from one of those things. Jay, am I a crazy conspiracy theorist?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the issue here is just how do you explain the behavior of someone like Bill Gates, right? So he has a career where he's like this arch capitalist, and everyone thinks he's an evil guy because he's like monopolized but then he turns into this philanthropist and finds success in the public eye as being the good guy. What you have is this like weird scientific. It's the scientific isn't the weird thing, but this mindset of engineering solutions to problems that are complex social problems that require careful understanding of all the trade-offs. And what his instinct is always seems to be in both his philanthropy and his capitalist work before is to a very, very simple technological solution which runs roughshod over all of the subtleties and often ends up causing more harm than good. I mean, I think that in this case, I don't know. Maybe his technological breakthrough is a good one. I have no idea, but I don't think that I'm not going to be eating any of those cows if I can avoid it until I understand a little more about them.
But isn't that the point? So he's going to invent something, or I guess he has already, or is investing in this company that's going to do something to cows so they don't burp and fart as much. And that will be either the meat wheat, or it will be the artificially engineered meat that he will also somehow profit from. By the way, this is the same guy who created Microsoft's Windows, which, as you're right, he got into a major antitrust lawsuit over it. But that was the thing that put viruses on computers. And now he's supposed to be in charge of our viruses of our bodies. Drew, help me.
It's a corollary to what I was saying before. By the way, did he say get beef without cows? How's that going to work?
Well, I think he means artificial.
He doesn't mean beef. He means something else. He means something made out of molds. Yeah. But I like the fact that he's at least thinking more broadly about the problem of it's burping primarily. Cows burping. Maybe we can make cows not burp. I like the idea that he's at least doing that than not just staying in the ideology of beef bad, cows bad, which was crazy. But it's the same thing I was complaining about with my physician colleagues. Now there's a corollary which has infected all of us, was irrational certitude. Irrational certitude when it comes, like Jay said, to very complex problems. We should have a rational uncertainty. We have the current pandemic is hubris. We need humility.
Yeah, so Jay, can you talk to that for a moment? Because I really, since Drew credited you, I'll do the same thing. That one of the reasons I did not go crazy on COVID on this show was that you were either the first or second expert that I had on, and you were kind of sobering. So I was like, let me just pace this thing out a little bit. But it seems to me that, to your point, guys like Bill Gates are looking for problems all the time, and they will do things not knowing, well, okay, the cow can't burp anymore. Maybe we've now somehow changed its molecular structure, and the meat that you're going to be eating is going to do God knows what to you.
Yeah, I think Drew hit it right on the head. This is hubris, right? This is scientific hubris. Like somehow, when I say science, I don't mean actual science, which I love, which I think is like a fantastic way to learn about the world and improve the world. I mean capital T, capital S science with the trademark sign. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Like you have this something that wears the skin suit of science and promises. It's like these hucksters promising you, just let's build a monorail and it'll solve all our problems. I mean, it just comes across that way. It's like someone who's wants to sell you something rather than really grappling. Like these are real problems. These are not things that we can just ignore. But whatever we choose to do is going to come with trade-offs. It's not going to be magic, and it's going to and he's promising magic, and I think that is what makes me uncomfortable watching him. Made me uncomfortable watching him during the pandemic, and it makes me uncomfortable watching him talk about cows and methane. There's no magic here.
I want to just highlight that again, is also say that science is a procedure, it's a process, it's a way of trying to uncover the truth in the world. And my friend Harvey Reisch distilled it down to one phrase that I thought was so exactly right on. He goes, look, it's just a scientific process. It is an instrument that tells us the null hypothesis is either informative or non-informative. That's science. That's it. The null hypothesis either told us something or it didn't tell us something, and we build from there. And I want to say one other thing about Jay being so measured at the beginning. I had the same experience, Dave, early on. Although I've noticed his Twitter feed has become a little more lively lately. He's getting a little more outspoken. I have noticed that. I like seeing it. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
It might be time to go back to being an anonymous again. I don't know too much.
By the way, Jay, I got the monorail reference. He went all the way to Ogdenville. I'm pretty sure it was the best episode of I almost said Seinfeld, of The Simpsons ever. Written by Conan O'Brien, believe it or not, around 1994. All right, guys. Well, it's always a pleasure having you on. I feel a little smarter. I think the audience did here. I'll put on my glasses so it looks like three smart guys did the show. There you go. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Now, Joy is the only person who could really speak to something like this. So, Joy, I'm going to pose this to you. Would you go to a nude wedding?
No. I'm even partially nude?
Look, I have my dermatologist put on a mask when he does it. So even he's never seen me naked. No one sees me naked.